Hello, my name is Bruce Stern, and I'm a partner with the law firm of Stark & Stark. For over 25 years, I've had the honor of representing individuals who have sustained a traumatic brain injury and their families, helping them to recover compensation for the losses and harms caused by the negligence of others. I've also had the privilege of serving as an officer with the International Brain Injury Association, as well as with the North America Brain Injury Society. What I'm going to be speaking with you today is about traumatic brain injury. Interestingly, the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention found that an estimated 1.3 million people are seen every year in the emergency room diagnosed with one form or another of traumatic brain injuries. The more interesting thing, though, is the number of people that sustain traumatic brain injuries that are never seen in an emergency room at a hospital. This is confirmed by the National Institute of Health that wrote, "The consequences of traumatic brain injury include a dramatic change in an individual's life course, profound disruption of the family, enormous loss of income or earning potential, and large expenses over a lifetime. There are approximately 300,000 admissions each year for persons with mild or moderate traumatic brain injury, and an additional unknown number of traumatic brain injuries that are not diagnosed but may result in long-term disability." They write, "Since TBI may result in lifelong impairment of an individual's physical, cognitive, and psychosocial functioning, and a prevalence is estimated to be 2.5 to 6.5 million individuals. Traumatic brain injury is a disorder of major public health significance. Furthermore, mild traumatic brain injury is significantly underdiagnosed, and the likely societal burden, therefore, even greater." So what is mild traumatic brain injury? One needs to appreciate that traumatic brain injury is a continuum. At one end is what's been described as mild traumatic brain injury, while at the other end is moderate and then severe. In 1993, the American Congress of Rehabilitation attempted to define what is mild traumatic brain injury. They define it as a patient who has sustained a mild traumatic brain injury is a person who's had a traumatically induced physiological disruption of brain function as manifested by at least one of the following: antegrade, that's before or post traumatic amnesia, loss of consciousness for under 30 minutes, a focal neurologic finding, or any alteration in mental state at the time of the accident. That is, feeling dazed, disoriented, or confused. Nathan Zassler, in a chapter in his book, Medical Rehabilitation of Traumatic Brain Injury, wrote, "Modifiers such as subtle, minimal, and minor are to be discouraged. Practitioners must understand that the term mild describes only the initial insult relative to the degree of neurologic severity. There may be no correlation with a degree of short or long-term impairment or functional disability." Years ago, I was on a panel with a colleague, Larry Smith, and Larry gave, in his lecture, had everybody write down the term mild, and then had everybody rip up the paper and suggested never using the term mild again. Unfortunately, the term mild is in the medical lexicon, and it's not so easy to do that. One of the things that I often see in my practice is when I'm reviewing emergency room records, or I get a call from an attorney who has a question and needs some help, and he or she will say to me, "Well, they never diagnosed mild traumatic brain injury in the hospital." And that's not surprising. There was a study done, published in the Archives of Physical Medicine, in which they went back and looked at medical records in the emergency room department for people who they later knew developed traumatic brain injury. And what the conclusion of the paper was that the diagnosis of mild traumatic brain injury was frequently absent from emergency room medical records, despite patients reporting findings consistent with mild traumatic brain injury when interviewed by study personnel. They found that there was a 56% false negative. That is, in 56% of the cases, The patient was not diagnosed with a mild traumatic brain injury, even though he or she had suffered a brain injury. Now keep in mind, it's not imperative that a person actually strike their head in order to suffer a traumatic brain injury. Just the acceleration, deceleration forces that can happen, for instance, in a car crash are sufficient to cause brain injury. Now, people who have traumatic brain injuries have three types of symptoms. The first is physical symptoms. Acutely, those who have sustained a brain injury may have nauseousness, vomiting. Longer term, they may have dizziness, headache, blurred vision, or fatigue. There are also cognitive deficits that these people suffer. Problems with attention, concentration, perception, memory, speech or language, and executive functions. The final kind of symptomatology is the one that is oftentimes not treated, and those are the behavioral changes. Problems with irritability, quickness to anger, emotional lability, and disinhibition. These are the problems that actually destroy marriages and explain why families that have such high rates of divorce where one of the spouses suffers a traumatic brain injury. These problems cause changes in relationship, changes in ability to engage in hobbies and leisure activities, decreased ability to perform at work or school, isolation, and increased alienation from others. You have to keep in mind that these three problems, physical, cognitive, emotional, behavioral issues, are not mutually exclusive. They all interact with each other. And that's why oftentimes a person may have some cognitive problems, have emotional problems, start feeling depressed, have anxiety. That creates a cyclical problem, and the symptoms tend to get worse. You have to keep in mind when these people, their whole lives are affected, socially, at work, financially, recreationally. It changes the whole meaning of life for them. So keeping in mind, people with mild traumatic brain injury, oftentimes, most of the time, get better, but not all the time. And these people can go on to have lifelong problems that affect all aspects of their life. Thank you for listening. I hope you have found this helpful. I'm Bruce Stern with Stark & Stark.